Before there was money, there was a problem. A very specific, very annoying problem that shows up the moment more than one person tries to trade with another. And the clever, almost invisible trick our ancestors used to solve it is something most of us have never actually been taught. Picture a farmer with a surplus of grain who badly needs a new pair of shoes. He finds a shoemaker, but the shoemaker doesn't want grain right now. He wants fish. The farmer doesn't have fish. He has to find someone with fish who wants grain, trade for the fish, then hope the shoemaker still wants shoes by the time he gets back. Economists call this the problem of the double coincidence of wants. For a barter trade to work, both people have to want, at the exact same moment, precisely what the other person happens to be offering. As soon as a society grows past a tiny handful of people, that coincidence becomes rare enough to make trade genuinely difficult. For a long time, popular textbooks told a simple story. Barter came first, everywhere, and money was invented later to fix it. But anthropologists who've actually studied small-scale traditional societies have found something more interesting. Pure stranger-to-stranger barter, the kind depicted in old economics textbooks, is remarkably rare as the actual foundation of ancient economies. Instead, most small communities ran on something closer to an obligation system. You gave what you had to people around you. And it was simply understood, without negotiation or immediate repayment, that the favor would be returned eventually, in some form when it was needed. Anthropologist David Graeber, who studied this extensively, argued that this kind of running social debt, remembered informally within a tight-knit community, was really the original economic glue, not one-for-one barter trades. The trouble starts precisely when trade has to happen between people who don't already trust each other. Strangers from different villages, different tribes, people with no ongoing relationship to keep each other honest. That's exactly where some object both sides agreed to value became useful, not necessarily because it was pretty, but because it was widely wanted, easy to carry, and hard to fake. Different societies landed on wildly different solutions to the same underlying problem, entirely independently of one another. Cowrie shells, small and durable and difficult to counterfeit, were used as currency across huge stretches of Africa, South Asia, and the Pacific Islands, sometimes for well over 3,000 years. On the island of Yap in the Pacific, communities used enormous carved stone discs, some of them too heavy to actually move, as a recognized store of value. Ownership simply changed hands by public agreement, everyone in the community collectively remembering who now owned which stone, even while it stayed sitting in the exact same spot in the ground. Cacao beans functioned as currency across parts of Mesoamerica, valuable enough that counterfeiters were known to hollow them out and stuff them with dirt. Salt, valuable for both flavor and food preservation, gave Roman soldiers part of their pay, a word that survives today directly inside the modern word salary. What almost every one of these early currencies shared was a specific, practical cluster of properties. They were reasonably durable. They were divisible into smaller, usable amounts. They were relatively easy to transport compared to whatever bulky goods they replaced. And critically, everyone in the trading community broadly agreed they were worth something. Notice that last property in particular. A cowrie shell has essentially no practical use on its own. You can't eat it, build with it, or wear it for warmth. Its entire value rests on a kind of shared social agreement, a collective story everyone quietly agrees to keep believing. Metal coins solved several of these practical problems at once, which is a large part of why they eventually spread so widely across so many different unconnected civilizations. Metals like gold, silver, and bronze were durable in a way organic materials like shells or cacao simply weren't. They could be melted down and divided into precise, verifiable amounts. And stamping a standard image or symbol onto a coin let a ruler or a city effectively vouch publicly for its weight and its purity, which meant traders no longer had to weigh and test every single piece of metal by hand before every transaction. The earliest known standardized coins appeared in the Kingdom of Lydia, in what's now Western Turkey, sometime around the 7th century BC. Made from a naturally occurring gold-silver alloy called electrum. Paper money represents an even bigger conceptual leap, arguably the biggest one in this entire long story, because it broke the link between the physical currency and any inherent material value almost completely. Early paper money, which first appeared in China during the Tang and Song dynasties, worked initially as a kind of receipt. You deposited your heavy metal coins with a trusted merchant or a government office, and you received a lightweight paper note in exchange, one that could be redeemed later for the same value in metal. Carrying a folded paper note across long trade routes was obviously far easier than hauling sacks of heavy coins. And the system spread specifically because it solved a real, practical, everyday logistical problem for actual merchants. Eventually, something quietly changed in most of these systems. Paper money, and later purely digital money, stopped being directly redeemable for gold or silver at all, and instead simply became valuable because a government declared it valuable. And because enough people collectively agreed to keep accepting it in everyday exchange for goods and labor. Economists call this fiat currency, and it depends entirely on collective trust rather than on any specific physical, redeemable material sitting quietly in a vault somewhere. Which brings us to a genuinely strange but important realization. Money. In almost every form it has ever actually taken throughout history, cowrie shells, carved stone discs, cacao beans, stamped metal coins, printed paper, and now lines of encrypted digital code, has never really been about the specific physical object itself. It has always fundamentally been about the underlying shared story, an enormous, ongoing, largely unspoken agreement among total strangers to treat a specific token as valuable, purely because everyone else around them is treating it as valuable too. Pull that collective agreement away, even briefly, as happens during a serious currency collapse, and the physical object left behind instantly becomes exactly what it always secretly was underneath the story. A shell, a stone, a scrap of printed paper, no different in itself from any other. There's a detail in the Yapstone money system that's worth sitting with a little longer, because it reveals something genuinely important about what money actually is at its core. One of the largest stones on the island, according to island tradition, sank to the bottom of the sea during transport and was never physically recovered at all. And yet the community simply agreed that ownership of that stone could still be transferred and tracked, exactly as if it were sitting safely on dry land in plain view. The stone's location, whether visible or lost entirely beneath the waves, didn't actually matter. What mattered, the only thing that ever really mattered, was the shared social record of who owned it. In a very real sense, that sunken stone functioned as a kind of ledger entry centuries before anyone had a formal word for that specific concept. Proof that money has always been fundamentally an agreement about ownership rather than a physical object you can necessarily hold in your hand. Ancient Mesopotamia offers another genuinely revealing piece of this same puzzle. Long before coins existed anywhere in the world, temple and palace administrators in Sumer kept meticulous written records of debts and credits using clay tablets, tracking exactly how much grain, silver, or livestock one party owed to another. Some economic historians studying this specific system have argued that these tablets, not physical coins at all, represent the true deepest root of money as a broader abstract concept, a formal, trusted, and specifically written record of an obligation between two people, rather than any particular physical token changing hands in the moment. Silver by weight was frequently used in these same records purely as a convenient unit of account, a shared way of measuring and comparing the value of very different things like grain, oil, or wool, without silver necessarily changing physical hands in every single transaction at all. The rise and fall of specific currencies throughout history also teaches a fairly blunt lesson about what happens when that underlying collective trust breaks down completely. The Roman Empire, over the course of several centuries, gradually reduced the actual silver content hidden inside its own coins, while still officially insisting they retained their original stated face value. A process modern economists now call debasement. As ordinary people gradually noticed and understood what was happening, trust in the currency eroded, prices for ordinary goods rose sharply, and the entire monetary system became measurably less stable and less useful as a foundation for everyday trade. The physical coins themselves hadn't really changed in any way that mattered practically. What had quietly changed, and changed decisively, was the underlying shared belief propping the whole system up from underneath. Modern digital currency, whether it's the balance sitting in an ordinary bank account or a newer cryptocurrency recorded on a blockchain, continues this same multi-thousand-year-old pattern in a form our distant ancestors would probably find almost unrecognizable, yet also somehow strangely familiar at the same time. There is no physical object changing hands at all in a digital transaction, only an updated entry in some shared trusted ledger, a modern electronic descendant of those ancient Sumerian clay tablets, and that same sunken, permanently invisible stone on the island of Yap. The specific technology keeps changing, generation after generation, sometimes dramatically. The underlying core idea, a shared social agreement about who owns